Hi everybody and welcome back for another exciting week of Español. This week we will be exploring Unidad 2, Lección 1, and in this chapter, some of our learning objectives, you will be able to identify vocabulary related to school subjects, schedules, and numbers from 11 through 100. You should be able to use that vocabulary to create sentences stating the time in Spanish, and also creating some sentences using AR verb conjugations. Finally, we're also going to be learning about the verb tener, which means to have. You'll learn to differentiate between tener and tener que. And also, you'll be able to use the verb tener in combination with what you learned previously with your school subject and your numbers to create a sentence stating at what time someone has a particular class. So that's sort of where we're going. As always, I'd like to get started just by taking a look at a short reading here and translating these things with you together so that you can get a feel for the vocab you see in this chapter. So we start out here in letter A and we see, Hola, me llamo Pablo, mi amiga es Claudia y somos estudiantes en Puebla, México. Me gusta llegar a clase temprano. Claudia, ¿qué hora es? You can see down here, we have a photo of her horario, her schedule with all of her various classes. You can see at 7 o'clock she has matemáticas, ciencias, science at 8:10. She has to usar la computadora, use the computer at 9:15. Inglés at 10:15. Arte at 10 till 12. Historia at 12:30. Español at 1:30. And she has to jugar al fútbol. She has to play soccer at 3:30. So you can see her schedule. So back to our reading here, we see, hello, my name is Pablo, me llamo Pablo, and mi amiga es Claudia. My friend is Claudia. And it says that somos estudiantes en Puebla, Mexico. So somos, from last chapter, somos, we are, estudiantes, students, in Puebla, Mexico. We're students in Puebla, Mexico. Pablo says that me gusta, I like, to llegar a clase temprano. Llegar is to arrive. I like to arrive to class, a clase, temprano, early. And then he asks Claudia, ¿Qué hora es? Literally, what hour is it? Or we would say, what time is it? ¿Qué hora es? So she's checking her clock, and you can see here some various responses. We see in letter B, ¿A qué hora son mis clases? At what hour? ¿A qué hora son? At what time are my classes? ¿A qué hora son mis clases? And he says, wow, tengo muchas clases. I have a lot of classes. You can see a few of his courses down here. We have matemáticas, math, ciencias, science, and inglés, English. We see a sentence here that la clase de matemáticas es a las 7 de la mañana. So the class of math. Notice we don't say matemáticas clase. We say la clase de matemáticas, the class of math. Okay? So the class of math is a las, it's at 7 de la mañana. 7, you know from a previous chapter, is 7. So math class is at 7 de la mañana in the morning. We see that la clase de ciencias es a las 8:10 de la mañana. So the class of science class, is at 8:10, literally 8 and 10, or we would say 8:10 de la mañana, in the morning. So notice, when you're creating sentences regarding time, which we're going to talk about soon, you are literally just doing a math problem. So 8 and 10 gave us 8:10. Here with la clase de inglés, English class, we can see that la clase de inglés es a las 10:15 de la mañana. So 10 is 10, and y cuarto is a quarter past 10, or we might say 15 minutes past, so 10:15. La clase de inglés es a las 10:15 de la mañana, 10:15 in the morning. As we continue, you see a few more. Here we have la clase de arte, art class, la clase de historia, history class. Notice the H is silent there, historia. And la clase de español, best class of the day. So we see here that la clase de arte es a las 12 menos 10 de la mañana. So art class is at 12 a las 12 menos 10. So this time it's at 12 o'clock minus 10 minutes. So if you take 12 o'clock, you subtract 10 minutes, art class is at 11:50 in the morning. La clase de historia es a las 12:30 de la tarde. So history is at 12 again, at 12, and 12:30, literally 12:30, or we would say 12:30. We also see here la clase de español. La clase de español es a la 1:30 de la tarde. So notice for all of our times, we have a las for everything other than 1 o'clock. That's because we have multiple hours. A las 2 at 2. A las 3 at 3. A las 4 at 4. But with 1 o'clock, we have a la 1, because it's a singular hour here. There's only 1 hour in this case. So la clase de español es a la 1, it's at 1. And a la 1:30, a 1:30 or 1:30. And this time, instead of de la mañana, in the morning, we have de la tarde for these last two, in the afternoon, de la tarde. Letter C tells us that son las 8:10 y tengo la clase de ciencias. A Claudia siempre le gusta contestar las preguntas del maestro. Ella es muy inteligente. Yo tengo que estudiar mucho y tomar apuntes en clase. So, first, let's talk about this bolded word in blue. Here we see son las. Now look back before. We had a las 12:30, and here we have son las 8:10. So notice the difference. A las, or a la, means at a certain time. If we have any time other than 1 o'clock, we say a las and the number to say at that time. Or if it's 1 o'clock, we say a la and the number to say at 1. Now, notice here with son las, instead of saying at 8:10, which would have been a las 8:10, here we're saying it's 8:10. So here we have son las 8:10. It's 8:10. Y tengo la clase de ciencias. And tengo, I have la clase de ciencias, science class. It says, and you can see them here, seated in their science course. Professor or teacher has on his lab coat here. We see, a Claudia siempre le gusta contestar las preguntas del maestro. So Claudia siempre, she always, a Claudia siempre, she always le gusta, she always likes to contestar las preguntas del maestro. You can see her here, she's raising her hand, she's going, ooh, me. She's trying to answer, contestar is to answer, las preguntas del maestro, the questions of the teacher, las preguntas del maestro. It tells us that ella es muy inteligente, she's very intelligent, and that yo tengo que estudiar mucho y tomar apuntes en clase. So yo tengo que, I have to. Notice up here we had just tengo by itself, tengo la clase de ciencias, I have science class. But here we wouldn't say I have study. We're trying to say I have to study, so we've inserted the word que here. Yo tengo que estudiar mucho. I have to study a lot. Y tomar apuntes en clase. And you can see this dude down here, tomar apuntes. He has to take notes. Okay, finally we see letter D here, where it tells us that tengo que sacar una buena nota en la clase de inglés. I have to get a good grade in English class. Sacar una buena nota en la clase de inglés. Notice again there's a que after the word tengo here, because you're saying I have to do something. So I've got to get a good grade in English class. A Claudia y a mí nos gusta estudiar a las 8 de la noche. Es un poco tarde, pero necesito estudiar. No me gusta sacar una mala nota. So I have to study to get a good grade in English class. A Claudia y a mí nos gusta estudiar a las 8 de la noche. So Claudia and I, we like, nos gusta, we like to estudiar, we like to study a las 8 de la noche, at 8 o'clock at night, a las 8 de la noche. Es un poco tarde, it's a little bit late, es un poco tarde, pero necesito estudiar, but I need to study. Necesito estudiar. No me gusta sacar una mala nota. So I have to study even though it's late because no me gusta sacar una mala nota. I don't like to get a bad grade. So notice, remember from before, buena or bueno is good. So buena nota, good grade. And malo or mala is bad. So mala nota, bad grade. You see some other things going on here in the picture. You can see he's holding up an examen. It looks like he's gotten a good grade, an A+. And over here we see some people in the library, and they have to usar la computadora, to use the computer. Okay. The other important element from this chapter are your numbers in Spanish. And you can see all of these listed here. I strongly recommend, now you of course have the Quizlet with all the vocab words for our chapter. You can study that as much as you need to, but remember, I really recommend making flashcards for these. Sometimes that muscle memory of writing things down and flipping the cards over and studying will be helpful. So these numbers are going to be super, super important, not only in this chapter, but also for many of the chapters to come. So please make sure that you're studying these. You see a few things here. We see 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15. And then here our numbers change a little bit. So notice 11 through 15, you kind of just have to memorize. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Numbers 16 through 19 sort of fall in their own element. Notice that 16 is literally a math problem. It's 16, which is 10, 10, y, and 6, 6. But we've changed the spelling a little bit here. In 10, the z changed to a c. Instead of a y, we have an I. And then 6 is still the same. So 16, 16. 17 is the same. 17. 18, 19. So you can see these are not very difficult. You know 10 and you know 6, so it should be easy to get 16. Same thing with the others. So 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So we've gotten to 19. As you look at 20, 20 in Spanish is pronounced as 20. 20 means 20. If you go to Starbucks and you get a venti beverage, a venti is 20 ounces, and venti is Italian for 20. So here you have 20 for 20. As we go through to add our numbers, you'll notice that 21 through 29 follow sort of the same similar pattern as 16 through 19. You already know 20 is 20, and you know 1 through 9. So rather than writing 21 with a Y, we've just changed the E to an I, and we've added our second number. So you get 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, y 29. So all these all the way through. Again, same thing. Instead of 10, y 6 with a Z, we've just changed the Z to a C, changed our Y to an I, and gotten 16. With 21, same thing. We combine the E in 20 and the Y just to become a single I, and then we've added a number. So 21, 22, 23, so on and so forth. From here, all the rest of your numbers are pretty easy. You just kind of have to memorize your tens from 30 all the way up to 100. So 30 in Spanish is 30, 40, 40, 50, 50, 60, 60, 70, 70, 80, 80. And notice that is a misprint in the book. It has 70 twice. This should be an 8 here. 80, just like ocho. 80 is 80. 90, 90, and 100. 100. So these are all of your various numbers. So memorize 11 through 15. 16 through 19, you're writing with an I. 21 through 29, you're writing with an I. All the others, in order to say 31 or 41 or 65, you're writing with the Y to say and. So 31 is 31, written with a Y. 35 would be 35, written with a Y. 55, 55. 75, 75. 3 words, always written with the Y. So one more time. 16 through 19 are one word written with an I. 21 through 29 are one word written with an I. Everything else will be multiple words written with a Y. Okay, these are something you definitely want to commit to memory. Take a screenshot of this. Make sure you know these. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit of practice here talking about las clases de Claudia. Las clases de Claudia, Claudia's classes. And for this one, we're going to be using alas or ala to say that Claudia has a class at a certain time. So remember, for 1 o'clock, we use a la una, at 1, a la una, just like you see here in the example, a la una. For all other classes, we are going to use a las and a number, as you see down here, a las, okay? In this case, we are using the verb tener, which means to have, to say at what time Claudia has a certain class. So, as we look here at the model, you can see a book here. It looks like a Spanish book. It says Gramática Español, or Española, perdón. And we're trying to say that a la 1:10, at 1:10, a la 1:10, Claudia tiene la clase de español. So this will give you a little bit of practice with your school subject. So a la 1:10, Claudia tiene la clase de español. So all of your sentences here are going to start in the same kind of formulaic way. You're going to have a time, at blah, blah, blah time. Claudia has, Claudia tiene, and then whatever class is going to change. So let's do number 1 together. You see a las 11 menos cuarto. So let's think about what that time it is. We know a las 11 is 11. Menos means minus, and cuarto is 15, or a quarter. So at 11 o'clock, minus 15 minutes, we have 10:45. And if you find 10:45 here, and the time, you can see it says English today. We know we have the class of English. So in our sentence, we're going to say, a las 11 menos cuarto, at 11 minus 15, Claudia tiene, and then the class of English. Claudia tiene la clase de inglés. A las 11 menos cuarto, Claudia tiene la clase de inglés. So now that we've done a few of these together, I want you to take a moment, pause your audio, and please give numbers 2 through 6 a quick try for me. When you're ready, you can unpause. Okay, now that you've had a second to try these, let's take a look. Number 2 says a las 7:30. Well, we know that siete is 7, and media is 30. So if we find the clock that says 7:30, we see some test tubes and it looks like a microscope there. So we want to say at 7:30, Claudia has science class. So a las 7:30, at 7:30, Claudia has la clase de ciencias, science class. In number 3, we're given here a las 12. We know that 12 is 12. And if you look here, it looks like we have Christopher Columbus or somebody peering out through a telescope looking at things. This is obviously history class. So we want to say at 12 o'clock that Claudia has history class. We are going to say that a las 12, Claudia tiene la clase de historia. Hopefully you're getting these right so far. And number 4, we see a las 9 menos 20. So 9, we know is 9, menos, minus, and 20 is 20. So at 9 o'clock minus 20 minutes, or at 8:40, we see an artist palette there. So we want to say that at 8:40, Claudia has art class. A las 9 menos 20, Claudia tiene la clase de arte. Number 5, a las 9:15, at 9:15, or at 9:15. Well, if you find 9:15, there's a calculator there. We know she's in math class. So we're going to say, a las 9:15, at 9:15, Claudia has la clase de matemáticas. And finally, our last one, number 6, we see a las 2:30, at 2:30. At 2:30, you see a guitar there. It looks like she has music class. So we're going to say in our final sentence that a las 2:30, Claudia tiene la clase de música. Claudia has music class. Okay, hope you're feeling better about these school subjects. Next, I want to give you just a little more practice with your numbers in Spanish. I know these are kind of challenging. So normally in an in-person class, I would ask you to engage in a speaking activity here with your partner. Obviously, in the online environment, it's not possible for us to do that. However, you can still do part B here. So you see the little thought bubbles with A and B. You can just ignore A for right now. It's going to give you some type of noun, chicos, boys, chicas, girls, estudiantes, students, so on and so forth. It's going to give you a class or classes, historia y arte, and it's going to give you a number to tell you how many of those students there are. So in this class, in the model, for example, we have chicos, boys, historia y arte, history and art, and 29. So we're trying to make a complete sentence that says there are 29 boys in the classes of history and art. So we've used this word H-A-Y, which is not hey, okay? H-A-Y is pronounced as I. Remember the H is silent in Spanish. So I, 29 we know is 29, written with an I, 29, chicos, boys, en la clase de historia y arte, or, perdón, en las clases de historia y arte, because we have multiple classes there. So hay 29 chicos en las clases de historia y arte. Let's do another one together here, just so you can kind of see. We'll do a couple more. So in this case, in the model, I've given you chicos, boys, matemáticas, math, and 10. So we're trying to write a sentence in English that would say there are 10 boys in math class. So you're going to start out with that word I, H-A-Y, I, whatever number, 10 in this case, chicos, en la clase de matemáticas. You could write it either way. So for example, I, 10 chicos en la clase de matemáticas. Now, notice, I've also written it for you another way here. So I said, en la clase de matemáticas, hay 10 chicos. You can also do it that way. It's personal preference. Some students find the first option here to be easier, and others like the first. It doesn't matter. So, en la clase de matemáticas, in the class of math, hay 10 chicos, or hay 10 chicos en la clase de matemáticas. You can switch it either way. Let's do just one more here to make sure you know what you're doing. In this case, our noun was estudiantes. We have arte for art, and 19. So we're trying to say that in art class, there are 19 students. En la clase de arte, in the class of art, there are 19 estudiantes, students. Okay, for the sake of time here, I would just like for you to complete the even numbers. I want you to do number 2, 4, 6, and 8. Please go through, give these a try. When you're ready, you can unpause your audio. Okay, here we go. So number 2, it gives us estudiantes, inglés y arte, and 58. Whoa. So we're trying to say that in the classes of English and art, there are 58 students. So notice we have multiple classes here. So instead of en la clase, I'm saying in las clases de inglés y arte, in the classes of English and art, en las clases de inglés y arte, there are 58 estudiantes. There are 58, written as 50, 50, y, and ocho, 8. 58 estudiantes. In number 4, we're given again estudiantes. This time we're given the classes of historia y arte, and there are 62. So we're trying to say that in the classes of history and art, there are 62 students. In las clases de historia y arte, hay 62 estudiantes. So in the classes of history and art, there are 62, 60 and 2, 62 estudiantes. Number 6. In 6, we're given the word estudiantes again, students, the class of arte, art, and 40. So we're trying to say that in the class of art, there are 40 students. In la clase de arte, notice we did not use las clases here because there's only one class. En la clase de arte, there are 40 estudiantes. 40 is 40. So en la clase de arte hay 40 estudiantes. And finally, number 8, chicos en todas las clases, and it gives us 74. So, en todas las clases hay 74 estudiantes. In this case, we're talking about chicos, boys, todas las clases, all the classes, and 74. So in all of the classes, in todas las clases, there are 74 estudiantes. 70 and 4, 74. Hopefully you're feeling much better about your numbers. Next, I want to hop into telling time in Spanish. And telling time is one of the most important things you'll learn how to do this semester, and it combines a lot of these things you already know. We're going to use a ser word, which you learned back in chapter 1. We're going to learn your numbers, or use your numbers from this chapter that you just learned recently, and use those things and apply them and combine them to create the time. So remember, our learning objective in this case is to create sentences stating what time it is in Spanish. You may recall from earlier in our lesson, we have ¿qué hora es? What time is it? Or ¿a qué hora es? At what time does something happen? We're going to start by looking at just the basic time. If we want to say that it's 1 o'clock, in Español, we say es la una. It's 1. Es la una. It can be 1 o'clock and any other time, 1:01 all the way to 1:59. And we're going to say es la una. So es la una y dos. Es la una y cinco. Es la una y 20. It's 1 o'clock. For any time other than 1 o'clock, we're going to say son las and the number. So son las dos. It's 2 o'clock. Son las tres. It's 3 o'clock. So remember, for 1 o'clock, es la una. For all other times, son las and a number. Now, instead of saying it's a certain time, if we want to say something happens at a certain time, we're going to use for 1 o'clock, a la una. For any time other than 1 o'clock, we're going to use a las and the number. So a la una, it happens at 1. La fiesta empieza a las dos. It happens at 2, a las dos. Or a las tres, a las cinco, a las siete. Any time other than 1 o'clock, we'll use a las, and 1 o'clock we'll use a la una. So I want you to practice here. It asks us how to say it's 2 o'clock. How would I begin this sentence? Would I use son las, es la, a las, or a la? Well, we're saying it's a certain time, so we're automatically going to use one of these two blue options here. It's not 1 o'clock, so I'm going to start by saying son las, and it's 2 o'clock, so I'm going to say son las dos. Same thing for the next one. It's 3:20 in this case, so it's not 1. I'm not using es la una. I'm going to start with son las. To say 3, we're going to say son las tres, and 20, son las tres y 20. So, as we keep looking, I just want to give you a few other expressions. We talked about these briefly earlier, but I just want to make sure you know them. So, as we're completing these math problems, we use the word y in order to add the time together. So, for example, at 8:30, we say 8:30 or 8:30. We're adding the time together. If you have 15 minutes till or 15 minutes after, we're using y cuarto for and a quarter or and 15 minutes later. Y cuarto. And then for half past or for 30 minutes, we're using y media. Y media. So son las 8:15. It's 8:15, a quarter after 8. So las 8:30. It's 8:30 or 30 minutes or half past 8, we might say. Now, you'll see in this visual here of the clock that typically we use the 30-minute mark as an indicator for determining whether we add or we subtract. So you may recall from some of those earlier problems we had it was 1 o'clock minus 20 minutes, or it was 12:40, or it was 8 o'clock minus 15 minutes. It was 7:45. So in Spanish, up until the 30-minute mark, we use the y or y here to add our time. So son las 2:29. It's 2:29. Son las 2:29. But for anything after the 30-minute mark, it's customary for us to subtract and go the other way. So if it's 8:50, for example, rather than saying it's 8 and 50 minutes, it's a little quicker to say it's 9 o'clock minus 10 minutes. Son las 9 menos 10. So we typically use this 30-minute mark here as an indicator to determine if we're going to add or subtract when talking about the time. And we'll have some practice with those in just a moment. Just to give you an idea, we have, if you want to specify on the dot in Spanish, like, man, it's 3 o'clock on the dot. Son las 3 en punto. In punto refers to on the dot. For noon, a lot of times instead of saying son las 12, we'll say that es mediodía. It's midday or noon, es mediodía. Same thing for midnight. Instead of saying it's 12 o'clock, we'll say es medianoche. It's midnight or literally the middle of the night, medianoche. And then you already learned this earlier in your reading, but to say in the morning, we add de la mañana. Son las 10 de la mañana, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Or for at night or in the afternoon, we have de la noche for at night, or de la tarde for the afternoon. So, son las 10 de la mañana, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Son las 10 de la noche, it's 10 o'clock at night. Son las 2 de la tarde, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you can kind of see how those work just a little bit. Okay, I have a couple of little time questions here for you to try. It gives you several times in Español, and you get to go through and fill out that time in Spanish. So for example, on the clock in number 1, you see 5:30 p.m. or 5:30 in the afternoon. So as we were writing this out, you have to think first, well, would we use solas or would we use esla? Well, it's not 1 o'clock, so we know that we should start with solas. It's 5, so son las 5, and it's 30 minutes after 5. Son las 5:30 de la tarde. I want you to take a moment, pause your audio, and please give numbers 2 through 6 a quick try, just to see how you're doing here. When you're ready, you can unpause. All right, now that you've had a second to try these, let's take a look. So number 2 tells us that it's 6:15 a.m. or 6:15 in the morning. We know it's not 1 o'clock, so we're going to start out here with son las. To say it's 6, we're going to say son las 6. And 15 minutes after, son las 6:15 de la mañana. That literally means it's a quarter after 6. Now, if you didn't say y cuarto here, you also could have said y15 for 15 minutes after, and both of those would have been completely acceptable. So, son las 6:15 or son las 6:15 de la mañana in the morning. Number 3 gave us 8:40. So in this case, notice it's after the 30-minute mark. So instead of saying that it's 8 and 40 minutes, we should actually say it's 9 minus 20 minutes. So in this case, we're going to start out with son las, it's not 1 o'clock, 9, son las 9, minus, menos, and 20, 20. So you get son las 9 menos 20 de la noche, in the evening. Okay, just a few more of these here. Number 4 gives us 12 o'clock a.m. So we know in this case that it's midnight. You could say son las 12 de la mañana. It's 12 o'clock in the morning, son las 12 de la mañana. Or you could say es medianoche. A native speaker in Spanish is probably going to be much more inclined to say es medianoche when referring to the time. Number 5, it says it's 9:45 a.m. Again, we're after the 30-minute mark here, so we should be subtracting. We're going to say it's 10 o'clock minus 15 minutes. It's 10, son las 10, minus, menos, and cuarto, 15. Or you could have said 15 here as well. Son las 10 menos cuarto de la mañana. And finally, it's 1:25. In this case, it's 1 o'clock. So we're not going to say son las. We're going to say, good, hopefully you're saying, es la 1:25 de la tarde. So it's 1:25. Es la 1:25 de la tarde, in the afternoon. Okay, hopefully you're feeling pretty good about your time in Español. I want to move on to our next learning objective here, which is to use the verb tener, which means to have, to discuss what one has to do. So let's flash back really fast to your subject pronouns in Espanol. I told you this magical box would be helpful to you throughout the duration of the semester. So here in your magical box, you have yo, which means I, tú, for you, informal. We have él, he, ella, she, and usted, you, formal. In our top right box, we have nosotros and nosotras, both of which mean we. Vosotros and vosotras, both of which mean you all, used only in Spain. Ellos and ellas, both of which mean they. And ustedes, which means you all, used in every country other than Spain. Hopefully you know those. As a recap though, they're there for you. We're going to take this verb tener and conjugate it in these various boxes. So tener is an irregular verb, so therefore you will just need to memorize these conjugations. The yo form of tener is tengo. So I have, yo tengo, tengo. You have, tú tienes, tienes. You have. So repitan, say this with me, repitan. Tengo, tienes. To say he or she has, we say, repitan, tiene. Good. So tengo, tienes, tiene. To say we have, tenemos, tenemos. To say you all in Spain have, tenéis. And they have, tienen. So these are your various conjugations of the verb tener. Let's say them together one more time. Repitan. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. So these are your various forms of tener. I have, you have, he or she has, etc. In Spanish, we can add the word que after the word tener in order to explain what one has to do. So, notice, there's a difference in saying, I have blonde hair and I have two blonde hair. So, tengo pelo rubio, I have blonde hair. It would not make sense to say, I have two blonde hair. However, if you want to say I have to study, you need to put a que after tener. Tengo que estudiar. I always tell my students to read the sentence in English. Would you say, I have study, or I have to study? Would you say, I have blonde hair, or I have two blonde hair? Read it in English first, and decide if you need a que or not. That's usually a good helper. Okay, in this next activity, you're going to see some pictures. This activity is titled Las Clases, and here we're going to be using this verb tener, which means to have again, to state what classes you have. So number one, you see the word yo, which you know means I, and on the board there we see all these crazy math equations. Looks kind of scary. So we're going to say I have math class. So you know that the yo form of tener, if you look back at your magical box, the yo form of tener is tengo. So as our final answer, we're going to say yo tengo, I have, la clase de matemáticas. In number two, you see nosotros, we, and you see some English stuff on the board. We're trying to say we have English. So the tener word to go with nosotros in this case should be tenemos. We're going to say that nosotros tenemos la clase de inglés. We have English class. All right, now that we've done a few together, I want you to pause your audio. Please try numbers 3 through 6 and see how you do. When you're ready, you can unpause. All right, let's take a look at these. So number 3 says Claudia y Pablo. And we're trying to say that Claudia y Pablo have a certain class. And that class to me looks like science. This guy's wearing a lab coat. So we first have to decide, would Claudia and Pablo be I, you, he, she, we, they, or you all? Well, we know that Claudia and Pablo would be they. Our they box here is our bottom right one. And to say that Claudia and Pablo have, we're going to say Claudia y Pablo tienen. In this case, they have science class, so Claudia y Pablo tienen la clase de ciencias. In number 4, we're given the subject tú, and we're trying to say that you have, looks like art class. They look like they're drawing on some canvases there. So you have, we're going to say that tú tienes la clase de arte. Number 5, we have Claudia, or she, and we're trying to say that she has the class of history. So we're going to say that Claudia tiene la clase de historia. And in number 6, we have ustedes, or you all, y'all. That looks like a Spanish class, the best class of all. So we want to say that you all have Spanish class. We're going to say ustedes tienen, bottom right box, la clase de ciencias. Hopefully, this has been helpful to you in understanding when to use the verb tener. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk to you about are our AR verbs in the present tense. So I want you to be able to know how to conjugate an AR verb, how to make a sentence in Spanish using an AR verb. And if you think back to our very first chapter, there were tons of verbs that ended in AR. We had hablar, to speak, escuchar música, to listen to music, pasar un rato con los amigos, to hang out with friends. There were so many verbs that ended in AR. Alquilar un DVD, to rent a DVD. So many verbs in Spanish end in AR. So I want to make sure you know how to conjugate these. So we're going to take these subject pronouns again that you were just dealing with a moment ago, yo, tú, él, ella, usted, and we're going to throw an AR verb in there. So let's take a basic verb like hablar. Hablar means to speak. The first thing we do as we conjugate this verb, and when I say conjugate, rather than saying I to talk, you to talk, we want to change it to say I talk, you talk, he or she talks, and that process is called conjugating. So as we conjugate this verb hablar, we're going to start by taking off the AR. I always tell my students you have to hobble on down. We've taken off the AR, we were left with HABL, so we're hobbling on down. Next, we have a set of endings for AR verbs. These endings work for all verbs that end in AR. So you have o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. These are the endings we need to throw on to conjugate a verb. So for hablar, we're going to take the AR off and add an o. Hablo, I talk. In the to form, take off your AR and add as. Hablas, you talk. In the he or she form, take off your AR and add back an A. Habla, he or she talks. So hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, habláis, and hablan. I want you to try now using the verb bailar. Bailar means to dance. So I want you to take a moment and I want you to remove the AR in bailar and conjugate it appropriately to say I dance, you dance, so on and so forth. When you're ready, you can unpause. Okay, let's check this one together. So bailar, to dance. As we go to conjugate bailar, take off your AR, carry down your BAIL in all of the boxes. Next, we need to add our appropriate AR endings. So o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. In this case, you get bailo, I dance. Bailas, you dance. Baila, he or she dances. Bailamos, we dance. Bailais, you all dance. And bailan, they dance. Here's an example in a photo as well of what this conjugation process looks like in real life. Now in real life, you're not going to have time to fill in that box and know which one of these conjugations to use. You just have to know which one is most appropriate. So here in this photo, you're seeing two students seated in the library, and this young lady asked this other woman here, ¿Qué estudias? What are you studying? So they took the verb estudiar, they chopped off the AR and added an AS to say, ¿Qué estudias? What are you studying? She responded and she said, Estudio matemáticas. I'm studying math. So she took the verb estudiar, chopped off an AR, and in the yo form, added an O. This is a basic interaction. In the tú form, what are you doing? And yo, in the I form, this is what I'm doing. So, ¿qué estudias? O estudio matemáticas. In this next activity, we're going to take the verbs that you see listed here, escuchar, tomar, sacar, estudiar, all these verbs that end in AR, and we're going to conjugate them appropriately in the present tense, but we're also going to add an expression of frequency here. In this case, you're always adding either siempre, always, or nunca, never. Let's look at a few examples together. Here in the model, it gives you that Claudia llegar a clase temprano. So Claudia and then to arrive to class early. Well, we're not trying to say that Claudia to arrive. We want to say Claudia arrives. And it tells you in the directions here to tell whether good students always or never do the following. So, Claudia, if she were a good student, would she always arrive to class early or never arrive to class early? She'd probably always arrive to class early. So we're going to say that Claudia always, Claudia siempre, and then we're going to take this verb llegar, we're going to chop off our AR. We know that Claudia would be she in this case. We're using our bottom left box. And our appropriate AR ending here would just be the letter A. So we're going to say that Claudia siempre llega a clase temprano. And you see here, they took off the AR and they added an A. Claudia siempre llega a clase temprano. Let's do another one together. In number 1, you see yo, escuchar en clase. Well, escuchar, as you know, is to listen, and en clase, in class. So would a good student always or never listen in class? Correct, they should always listen. So we're going to say that yo siempre, and not just yo siempre escuchar en clase, but we have to take escuchar, we have to take off the AR, we're left with escuch, and in the yo form, we're going to add an O to say that yo siempre escucho en clase. I want you to take a moment now and try the rest of these just to see how you do, okay? Numbers 2 through 8. Please go ahead, pause your audio, and give these a try. When you're ready, you can unpause. Okay, now that you've had a second to look at these, let's see how you're doing. So in number 2, we see Pablo and tomar apuntes. Pablo and to take notes. Well, so again, ask yourself the question, would a good student always or never take notes? Well, good students always take notes in my book, so we're going to say that Pablo always takes notes. So we have the verb tomar here. We're going to take the AR off. We're left with tom. And we need to add an A for Pablo or he. So Pablo siempre toma apuntes en clase. In our next example, we're given nosotros and sacar malas notas, to get bad grades. Well, would a good student always or never get bad grades? I would say never here. It's too bad sometimes isn't an option, okay? But we never get bad grades, we're going to say here. So nosotros nunca for never. And then for sacar, to say we never get, we're going to take sacar, chop off our AR, we're left with sac. And to say that we never, we're going to add amos on the end. So nosotros nunca sacamos malas notas. We never get bad grades. Let's look at another one. In this case, you see Claudia y Pablo and estudiar. We're trying to say that Claudia and Pablo, that they study. And you have to stop and ask yourself the question, would good students, would they always or never study? Hopefully you're saying that good students, that they always study. So we're going to take this verb estudiar, we're going to chop off our AR, and in this case to say that they always study, we're going to add back an AN because you can look back at your endings and say, oh, Claudia and Pablo, that would be they. We're using our bottom right box, and we should have an AN as our ending. Let's do just one more of these. In number 5, you're given tú and contestar preguntas. So we're trying to decide. Contestar preguntas is to answer questions. Well, would a good student always or never answer questions? Well, good students always answer questions. So we're going to take contestar preguntas. We're going to chop off our AR. And in the tú form, we should add back an AS to say that tú siempre contestas preguntas. Okay, so hopefully you're getting a feel for how these work. I don't want to kill you with these. So our big overall takeaway for this chapter is that you should be able to identify vocabulary related to these school subjects, numbers from 11 through 100, and schedules, that you should be able to state what time it is in Spanish, and that you should be able to create sentences using AR verbs and the verb tener. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always just a short phone call or email away, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. We'll talk soon. Thank you.